What if Persia crushed Greece? Picture the Aegean at twilight, the water black as spilled ink, oars biting the sea in rhythm, fires licking at the wooden ribs of shattered triremes. On one shore, a city that calls itself the School of Hellas waits for dawn. On the other, the great king's banners ripple like living flame. If the Persians win here, if the Achaemenid Empire does not stumble, what happens to the world we call the West? Before we twist the timeline, let's ground ourselves in what really happened. The Persian Empire of the 5th century BCE was enormous. From the Indus Valley to the Aegean, from the Nile to the Caucasus, one system of roads, satraps, and royal couriers carried power across 3 continents. But on the empire's far western fringe were the Greek city-states, small, quarrelsome, proud. When Persia tried to fold them in fully after the Ionian revolt, it met something stubborn. Marathon came first. A Persian expedition lands in 490 BCE. The Athenians, not yet the swaggering power they would become, charge the Persian line and send it reeling back to the ships. 10 years later, Persia returns under Xerxes with a force the Greeks call a sea of men. Thermopylae, a Spartan king and a scarlet wall of shields, hold a narrow pass until betrayal opens a goat path. The Spartans die. The pass falls. Athens is burned. And then Salamis, narrow waters, sharp rocks, the winds fickle and mean. Themistocles lures the Persian fleet into a trap. Greek triremes, shorter and hungrier, bite and pull and flip the lumbering ships around them. Phoenicians, Ionians, Egyptians. Persia's sea power breaks in the cramped kill zone. Xerxes watches from the hillside as his navy tears itself apart. A year later at Plataea, the Greeks land the knockout punch on land. The invasion is over. The city-states survive. Out of that survival comes a chain reaction. The Delian League grows into an Athenian empire. Pericles builds a city of marble and ego. Democracy matures, messy, loud, alive. Tragedy, philosophy, geometry, history writing all burn hotter. Later, when the Greek world fights itself to exhaustion, a king from Macedon unifies it and strikes east. Alexander's conquest fractures Persia and spreads Hellenic culture from Egypt to Afghanistan. Rome arrives, inherits the Greek mind, and stitches together the Mediterranean. The West, as we imagine it, takes shape. So, what if one link in that chain snaps? What if Salamis goes the other way? Imagine the wind shifting hard against the Greeks, the currents pushing them out of formation. Themistocles miscalculates. The Persian admirals, Phoenician sea wolves, hold discipline in the straits. The compact Greek line turns chaotic. Ram after ram lands cleanly on Athenian hulls. The narrow waters fill with splintered oars, drowning men, and the iron taste of brine. Athens watches its navy die. With their fleet broken, the Greek coalition loses its shield. Plataea never happens, or if it does, it becomes a desperate last stand without supply lines and without sea control. Corinth and Megara, their coasts exposed, flip to survival mode. Thebes and other pro-Persian cities, remember Greece was not a single team, help negotiate a settlement under the gaze of a vast army and a newly decisive navy. Persia doesn't need to annex every wheat field of Greece to win. It needs control of the coasts, the harbors, and the tribute routes. The Aegean becomes, effectively, a Persian lake patrolled by Phoenician squadrons. The great king offers terms the empire has offered 100 times before. Keep your gods, keep your laws, mostly, but pay what is owed. Send hostages from your leading families, and accept a satrap's oversight. The Greeks become the Yana of the mainland, like their Ionian cousins in Asia Minor, folded into the imperial ledger. Athens is punished hardest. Its walls are pulled down, rebuilt thinner. The long walls never rise. Democratic institutions are gutted. A Persian-approved oligarchy, call them tyrants, call them friends of the king, manages the city under the watchful eye of a satrap at Sardis. Aramaic appears on seals and tablets alongside Greek. The imperial scribal language snakes into contracts and tax receipts. Coinage continues, but now the owl of Athena shares space with symbols of royal authority. Sparta faces a different fate. The Spartans were terrifying on land and allergic to foreign masters, but their model depends on keeping the helots down and their rivals out. Persia leverages that. The satrap offers grain in bad harvests, gold to stabilize the system, and the occasional wink when Spartiates bully neighbors, as long as they do not threaten the king's peace. Sparta becomes what it always preferred to be, guardian of its own way of life, uninterested in empire, cautious under a larger umbrella. The Spartan mystique survives, but its geopolitical bite dulls without a hostile Athens to sharpen it. No Athenian empire rises, no Peloponnesian war tears the Greek mind in half. The theater still fills, poets still write. But the stage is different. Aeschylus and Sophocles don't have a democratic mass to interrogate itself in public. They have a satrap's court and dignitaries to impress. Plays become less about the collective conscience and more about imperial virtues. Justice under a far-seeing king, hubris punished by cosmic order. Philosopher teachers still gather students, but the lessons are hedged, careful. A Socrates may still ask dangerous questions in the agora, until a Persian-appointed council reminds him that the king prefers harmony over corrosive doubt. Administration molds culture at 1,000 points of contact. The royal road extends its last branch deeper into Thrace and Macedon, bringing swift messengers and standard weights. Greek merchants find predictable tariffs and safer sea lanes under Persian patrols. In temples from Ephesus to Delphi, processions include prayers for the welfare of the great king. Zoroastrian fire altars do not smother the Greek pantheon. Achaemenid policy is rarely that crude. But the aura of the imperial cult is everywhere. An ethical sky that prizes truth-telling, order, duty, and the cosmic battle against the lie. Now look north to Macedon. In our timeline, Macedon rises under Philip II, reforms the phalanx, and turns Greece into the launchpad for Alexander. In this timeline, Macedon is a borderland satrapy, or a tightly bound client. Persian gold pays Macedonian kings, Persian officers advise. Persian diplomats ensure no league of Greek cities gives Macedon an excuse for conquest. The innovations that transform warfare, the Sarissa phalanx, the integrated use of cavalry, may still develop in some form, but their direction is inward, policing the frontier, not outward, dreaming of Asia. No Alexander strikes the empire at its seams because there are no seams to pry open. The Achaemenid machine, sharpened by victory rather than rattled by defeat, reforms where it was creaky. Corruption is punished. Sea power stays robust with a standing Phoenician core, reinforced by Ionian Greek mariners now handsomely paid to fight for the hand that feeds them. The empire learns to be a naval power permanently, not just when crisis forces it. Shift west. Sicily and the central Mediterranean. In our world, Greek cities like Syracuse joust with Carthage, and later Rome grows into a shark that eats both. In this world, the Greek polis of the West are weaker, their cultural influence dimmed by Eastern subordination. Carthage faces less Hellenic competition and becomes the undisputed hegemon of the Western Sea. It standardizes harbors, dominates the Sardinian and Spanish metal trade, and perfects a naval-industrial complex that turns forests into fleets. Rome still exists. The Tiber still flows. The Latin stubbornness is not a historical glitch. It's a temperament forged by centuries of hill-town rivalries. Rome expands across Italy, learns to build roads, negotiates alliances, builds a citizen-soldier machine. But two shadows lean over it: Carthage in the west and Persia in the east. Sicily doesn't drift into Rome's orbit so easily, and Greek diplomacy isn't there to play broker. The first major collision of the central Mediterranean is not a Punic war with a wobbly Carthage, but a contest where Carthage is confident, wealthy, and already accustomed to swatting down rivals at sea. In such a fight, Rome may never learn dominance at sea. It may become a hard-edged land power boxed into Italy's spine, a regional counterweight rather than a continental empire. The Latin language remains local, vibrant but contained. The Roman legal mind still chisels rules on bronze, but its jurisdiction doesn't sweep the world. Meanwhile, in the east, no Alexandrian empire means no sudden fusion into the Hellenistic kingdoms. There is no Diadochi chaos. Egypt remains a satrapy rather than a Ptolemaic dynasty. But Persia is not anti-knowledge. It prizes order and record-keeping. Babylon and Memphis, Sardis and Susa, centers older than Athens, become magnets for thinkers willing to work under patronage. Greek mathematicians find themselves in imperial archives, copying, arguing, building on Babylonian tables of the skies. Geometry advances, but its diffusion follows different veins: Aramaic memoranda, Greek commentaries, and Egyptian practical manuals for canal engineers. Without a Hellenistic Alexandria rising under Greek kings, the library as we know it may never exist. Instead, imagine a federated archive system. Royal repositories linked by couriers, standardized catalog tablets, and multilingual scholars trained to move between scripts. Knowledge spreads in packets along the King's Road and through Carthaginian trade houses. Slower in some ways, more durable in others. Greek becomes the language of craft and literature in the Aegean. Aramaic remains the empire's connective tissue. Punic dominates the Western Sea. Religion threads through this alternate world like a second map. Zoroastrian ethics, truth, the fight against the lie, purity rituals, permeate elite culture from Ephesus to the Euphrates. The empire's famous tolerance lets local cults breathe, but the imperial preference is clear. Judaism, which in our world thrived under Persian protection after the Babylonian exile, continues under an empire that never loses its grip on the Levant to a Hellenistic or Roman power. When a small messianic movement rises in Judea centuries later, its path does not run through Roman roads, Latin law, and a universalizing imperial church. It runs through satrapies and caravanserais. Its scriptures are copied in Aramaic first. Its philosophy debates with Zoroastrian priests and Babylonian sages before it ever spars with a Latin jurist. Without a Constantine, there is no Roman imperial Christianity to baptize Europe wholesale. The religious center of gravity sits east, not west. If Christianity survives and grows, it may look more Syriac and Persian, less Mediterranean Latin. Or it may not dominate at all. Zoroastrianism, with state backing and developed priestly institutions, could remain the default frame of moral reality from Anatolia to the Indus for far longer. Europe's far west, under Carthage's secular commercial power, leans toward civic cults and pragmatic syncretism. What does this do to the idea of the West? The concept shifts. There is no single Latin backbone running from Britain to Jerusalem. There is an Achaemenid light Greece, disciplined, taxed, cosmopolitan in a controlled way, and a Carthaginian West that prizes contract over conquest. The sharp Athens to Rome pipeline that fed the Renaissance is thinner, its texts scattered in imperial archives and Punic warehouses. Later European revivals would draw from Greek works mediated by Aramaic glosses and Persian court commentaries, not from a Latin canon preserved by a Roman church. And yet, don't mistake this world for a dimmer one. Empires that hold together refine systems. The Achaemenids, seasoned by victory, could push standardization further. Weights and measures, irrigation policy, a postal system that becomes a marvel of reliability. Carthage, uncontested, refines accounting, naval provisioning, ship design. The technology of everyday life, mills, presses, lathes, improves in workshops from Sidon to Syracuse. Science grows differently. Fewer lone iconoclasts, more committees in the shadow of bureaucracy. Breakthroughs come when they align with imperial interests. Surveying, astronomy for calendars, medicine for armies, and there is resistance. Always. Greek identity doesn't dissolve. The memory of the time before the satrap becomes a badge. Festivals whisper old songs. Philosophers smuggle sharper ideas into commentaries on ethics. Spartans grumble. Argos plots. Theban families angle for advantage. The empire manages it with the soft violence of paperwork and the occasional hard reminder of who commands the sea. Here's a thought experiment to test the skeleton of this world. A century after Xerxes, a Persian king dies without a clear heir. In our timeline, such moments invite sanitation by a Macedonian storm. In this one, no Macedonian storm exists. Instead, internal claimants rally support from satraps, and the navy becomes the arbiter. The fleet that controls the Aegean decides the crown in Susa. Imagine Greek islanders, now thoroughly embedded in imperial service, playing kingmaker for the empire that once conquered them. It's a twist. Greece matters not as a rebel, but as a pillar. Midway through our journey, I want to hear from you. Could Persia have sustained control over mainland Greece for centuries, or would local resistance have eventually shattered the Satrapies? Drop your take below. And if you're loving these deep dives into history's hinges, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss what we explore next. Now, Rome again. Because Rome never goes away quietly. Even boxed in, it innovates. The Roman genius for law could become a regional export. Italian leagues governed by treaties that Carthage respects, because contracts are Carthage's sacred text. Roman engineering, roads, aqueducts, still reshapes Italy. And in moments of Carthaginian distraction, Rome grabs a port, tests a fleet, loses, learns, tries again. But without a decisive sea victory, no Corvus miracle, no sudden shipyard frenzy, Rome remains a disciplined problem that the great powers manage. The long tail of this timeline is a bipolar or tripolar Mediterranean, Achaemenid East, Carthaginian West, and a restless Italian nucleus that won't stay still. Instead of Latin as the empire's glue, Aramaic and Punic become the working languages of trade and power. Greek lives as a prestigious regional tongue, like a polished dialect in a large empire, vibrant in art and argument, cautious in politics. When steppe peoples push south in later centuries, Sarmatians, later Alans, eventually waves that, in our world, tangle with Rome, they hit different walls. In the east, a navalized Persia can shift troops by sea along the Anatolian littoral, plugging holes with speed. In the west, Carthage purchases security with gold and hirelings. The great migrations look less like the collapse of a single Roman trunk and more like a long, dampened percussion against two flexible barriers. Could the Achaemenids live forever? No empire does. The ecology of great power is change. But holding Greece turns the Achaemenids from an empire that died to Alexander into an empire that later transforms on its own terms, mutating into a reformed Persian state, or fragmenting into regional kingdoms that speak Aramaic in Chancery and Greek in the marketplace. The point is not immortality, it's inertia. Winning Greece gives Persia time, and time in history is oxygen. And what of the human texture inside this alternative? Walk an Athenian street 2 generations after Salamis lost. The stones are the same, but the rhythm is altered. Market stalls sell Phoenician dyes and Persian carpets alongside olive oil and pottery. A tax collector's office hums in Aramaic. A teacher reads from Hesiod and, in the next breath, quotes a Zoroastrian maxim about truth and the world's order. Young men still argue about courage and justice, but they choose their words carefully, because the satrap's nephew studies in the same gymnasium. The city is less a sovereign mind than a brilliant province, absorbed yet still itself. Now pan high. The phrase "the West" would mean something very different. Less Rome and Latin law, more Carthage and chartered harbors. Less democratic experimentation in city assemblies, more stable oligarchies under imperial sunlight. The modern heirs, those of us who live in the culture shaped by that ancient divergence, would inherit different defaults: contracts over constitutions, archives over senates, a respect for order drawn from fire altars and temple accounts rather than from a republican mythology of citizen legionaries. It's tempting to call this a darker world. That's not quite fair. It's a world where different virtues rise: reliability over glory, continuity over conquest. The price is also different. Fewer loud, destabilizing experiments. Fewer moments where a society throws everything on the table to see what might evolve. The hinge, in the end, is a handful of hours in a narrow strait, wind hissing over oars. If the current had turned, if orders had been obeyed a little better or a little worse, the great king might have smiled from his hillside, and the story we tell about ourselves would begin on a different shore. History is a set of doors. Salamis was one. We passed through. Somewhere in the great library of could-have-beens, there's a world where we didn't, and it's as coherent, as human, and as fragile as ours. So when you hear the words "the West," remember the sea at dusk, and the sound of wood splintering. Remember how thin the line was between one civilization's story and another's. And remember that the characters would still be us, brilliant, flawed, improvising, no matter which empire's stamp pressed the wax.